Royal Standley of Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, offering securities through United Planners Financial Services member FINRA SIPC, guides clients with empathy in discovering and reaching their financial goals, and creates financial plans for clients so they can live their life by design. In these episodes, he relates his expert financial insights and discusses timely topics. Royal strives for excellence and has a passion for sharing his knowledge and supporting his community. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Life by Design with Royal Standley of Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors. Good morning, Royal. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Eric. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Fantastic. It is, it's that fall season, so it's kind of time for some ice and snow and all that stuff here. I know that you don't get as much there, but what's it looking like?
Yeah, it's a nice, beautiful fall that we're having. We usually don't get too much ice and snow where we're at, maybe a day or two a year. So we don't have too much to worry about. I know where you're at. You really get it there in the Midwest. So
yeah, it's something that has taken its toll on my driveway, Royal. I have to buy a new driveway. Seriously, the salt and stuff that we add to it, just so the ice melts, and we get the snowblower out there, and it's chipping away at it. But that's the joys of home ownership, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all up to you to keep it up and keep it nice and modern and with all the comforts of home.
Exactly. And I know that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about home ownership. And I'm curious why you chose this topic.
I think it's just such an important and essential topic when it comes to financial planning is looking at home ownership and where it fits into the financial plan as a way of building wealth, of creating stability and security for your family. So I thought we'd just kind of spend some time and kind of talk through that. I know I've owned a number of homes in my life, and right now just looking at, I was talking to my wife last night about it I'm not thinking of the next home we're going to buy, which is nice. We're in a home where it's like, okay, we have enough space to grow into this. We're adding another child here in the next month or two.
That's right. Very exciting.
So yeah, like we have enough space for them. And I know in previous houses it's gotten tight much quicker than we expected. So we knew we had to move to somewhere with a little bit more space, a little bit more creature comforts and that sort of thing.
I love the contrast, Royal, because I'm on the back end of that stage where now I have a house that's probably too much room. I don't need quite this many rooms because all my kids are out of the house. Now we do have one of the bedrooms dedicated to the grandbabies. That's their room, and slides and all sorts of things in that room for them to play with. Yeah,
I'm sure you sneak in there occasionally and play with them when they're not there.
Once I reinforced it, the slide that is, you just don't want to crush it for him. But it just looking at. We are looking at that next home. We'd like a ranch, for instance. I don't want this many stairs. I've got 3 flights of stairs in my house, and my knees are saying, you know what, maybe.
Now, you want a ranch style, or you want a full working ranch?
Oh, good Lord, no. I mean, I love the idea of a ranch, but not me working it, Royal. I'd love to look out and see horses every day, but not have to do all the work involved with that. No, just a one-level home with a basement, because here in Nebraska, you've got those occasional tornadoes that you got to plan for. But yeah, home ownership is a beautiful thing. I love it. I am absolutely in love with owning my home. But it's interesting to see that you are growing into one, and you've got that space, and now I'm looking to downsize a little bit.
Yeah, and really, when we talk about home ownership and paying off a home, sometimes people get hung up on the idea of, oh wait, this isn't my forever home, or there's going to be a change at some point, that sort of thing. What I'm really trying to get people to is the idea of once you get to retirement, having a home that is paid off is really, I think, kind of the number one thing I see for my most successful clients. They've put in the hard work and the dedication of, hey, we got this place paid off. Now, maybe they've moved, maybe they've upgraded or downgraded, depending on their own situation, but they've built up enough equity in their home to really not have to worry about a mortgage payment in retirement. And that's really, in my opinion, one of the most important things we can look at when building a financial plan. So we kind of touched on, some of the things, the stability and security of just owning a home. if we look at the demographics of American wealth, so much of American wealth is tied up in an individual or a couple's primary residence.
Mm-hmm.
So the mechanism when you buy a home, I think a lot of people start off with, hey, we're going to put down, 3 or 5%. Some who are a little bit more dedicated, a little bit more frugal might even be able to come in and put down 20%. We love to see people being able to do that. But sometimes there's just situations where, listen, we just need to get into a place. It's time. Let's get into it. We know we probably need to stay here a little bit longer to build up equity before we move. But we love to see people buy that first home and then start chunking away at that mortgage payment. So one of the big things I see people look at is renting versus buying. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I can counsel people on is, when is renting appropriate? When is buying appropriate? In my opinion, kind of early on in life, especially as you may be making changes on, your career, where you live, that sort of thing, renting can be extremely appropriate. If you think that you're going to be there, let's just say less than 3 years, oftentimes renting is probably the better option. Because remember, there are some costs associated with selling a home, realtors' fees, closing costs, that sort of thing, which can add up to, anywhere from, 6 to 8% of the total value of the home. So that can put you underwater if you're only going to stay in a home, 2 to 3 years. So that's really where renting comes into play, is if you're not looking to put down roots where you're at, or if there is a large advantage of renting versus buying. One of the nice things that you have as a renter is you don't have to pay for any repairs. You don't really have to pay for any major maintenance. Whereas if you're a homeowner, especially if you buy a fixer-up, you're writing a check every month to somebody to fix something, or you're spending your weekends doing it yourself. Mm-hmm. So early on in life, or if you're in that transitional period, renting's great. But if you're looking at being someplace, longer than 3 years, especially if you have no plans of moving in the next 5, that's really where buying makes a lot of sense, because you are paying a lot in interest there, but you are building equity and you're buying an asset that historically has appreciated. Mm-hmm. If we look at real estate and what it's done over the long run, it runs about 2% per year in appreciation. And that's kind of smoothing out the long-term averages, which isn't great if you're just, buying a chunk of real estate and saying, hey, that's going to be all I do is just real estate. But where that's really powerful is with the leverage you're using to buy that. So let's say you put down $10,000 on a $300,000 home. You're making that $2,000 a month payment. But what you've just done is you're leveraging yourself. You've put down $10,000 to buy an asset worth $300,000. And if it goes up 2% each year, that's about a $6,000 increase in the amount of the property, in the value of the property. So mm-hmm. You've invested $10,000 and you're making almost a 60% return each year just on that appreciation. Now, if you put more down, those numbers change quite a bit, but that's really why home ownership in America, where you can borrow a fairly large sum of money, put it down on a house, and control that value, that's where we see that long-term wealth building effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. It's nice to see that. It's tough. I know that 2008 and 2009 is a whole different story because of the housing market, the bubble, and all that jazz. But since then, I don't think it's really been all that rocky.
It hasn't been. I mean, and there's really those periods of, kind of smooth sailing, and then we might run into some issues. I think there could be a possibility for some of that, especially, as we look around some of the markets. Probably nothing on a national scale like we saw in 2008, but there's definitely pockets there. I know in New York City, we've really seen a pullback there in real estate values, just as with the COVID crisis, people are kind of reconsidering, hey, it's nicer to live by family. Hey, it's nicer not to be in a city of 8 million people during a pandemic. So those types of localized changes in value will happen over time. Looking around here, we're seeing prices really go up. And I think some of that is just a supply factor with the fires we had, losing over 2,000 homes. That just creates a much larger demand while reducing supply. So here locally, we are seeing very small inventories, which is pushing prices up, and a lot of demand for long-term housing.
Yeah, Royal, one thing that I never even really thought of before, I suppose it was probably during the hurricanes down in Houston, if you remember a few years back. One thing that drove housing prices up was the price of supplies, building supplies specifically. So when the hurricanes were hitting, and unfortunately I had a large project at my house that had to be done. I had a wall that needed to be replaced. And going and purchasing siding, insulation, even just OSB, plywood, the prices were so high during that time, and they had changed so much in just a year because of the high demand of those building supplies being used in different areas of the country where disasters had happened, like Houston. And so just building new homes, right? I mean, imagine the cost increase on building an entire new home because of all the supply increase, the material increase. Existing homes that already have those materials sitting there, right? All of a sudden, those prices go up too because they're like, oh well, it's way more expensive to build a new home, so we have to raise the prices on the existing homes as well, or it just kind of fluctuates in the market that way. So that was a big surprise to me.
Yeah, and that's really the market kind of correcting that imbalance itself of looking at, this is how much it costs to buy to build a new home. That's going to affect demand and supply. So, how do all those factors come in and affect the overall market? The other thing, as we look at home ownership as part of the financial plan, one of the things we really look at, whether you have a mortgage, or this would really be comparing a mortgage versus someone who is renting in building a financial plan, is you might say, okay, I'm 60, I'm 65 years old. Do I really want to borrow a large sum of money now for the next 30 years when I can just rent? I have a lot of flexibility, have a lot of freedom, and just rent. The issue becomes inflation. When you take out a mortgage, and assuming you're on a fixed interest rate, you know exactly what that mortgage payment is going to be over the next 30 years. That's not true with rent. Even if you can rent for less than what a mortgage would be, that rent over the next 30 years is going to go up. And depending on what market you're in, it could go up quite a bit.
Wow, that's a great point.
And here in Oregon, we had some rules and regulations come out really trying to cap rents and the increases that we were seeing up in the Portland metro area, where basically, and this is rough, but basically they capped the ability to raise rents to about 7% per year is the most you could increase rents by. Even if someone is just increasing the rent by 7%, you're going to see your rent double in 10 years.
Yeah, that's huge.
That right there, the difference between buying a home and having that fixed mortgage payment versus the inflation of rents is really powerful when we look at financial plans.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a friend who's, in their 60s and just explaining that concept to them of just this is going to be the better long-term situation. And especially here on the West Coast, where we have a very tight rental market, the cost of rent is oftentimes more than the cost of a mortgage, especially with interest rates as low as they are.
Absolutely. And I want to give a shout out to all the landlords out there. I don't want people thinking that, landlords are just out there rubbing their hands together going, oh boy, 7%. I can raise it by 7% every year. There's a lot that goes into it. And one of the things is property taxes, right? Because when a city or state, when they raise property taxes, that raises the cost to the homeowner, and therefore that is most likely going to be also related to the rent. The rent's going to have to go up to cover those costs. So I don't want people thinking that landlords are greedy. Those are some things that they have to consider as well. And property taxes, assessments, and things like that, those are just strange, right? I don't know in your area, Royal, but they just, I don't know if they throw a dart at a dartboard a lot of times, but they just kind of choose at random how much your property tax is going to be for the next year, or how the value of your home all of a sudden goes up by $35,000. Oh, look at you. You get to pay more in taxes. Oh, boy. My favorite.
Yeah, I just got an assessment for one of the homes I own, and it was about a $90,000 increase in value. And I was like, I didn't put $90,000 into improvements on this property. But
I added that third kitchen I've always wanted. Come on. Jeez.
Yeah. And I think the unintended consequence there is there's a lot of landlords out there who really weren't too concerned about raising rents, every year. But now that there's a cap on how much you can increase it, they're just looking at it as like, well, that's what I'm going to have to increase it so I can keep the rents where they should be with the rest of the market. So I think seeing those higher rents is just something we're going to see across the board here for the foreseeable future. So when I'm sitting down with a client, looking at a financial plan and doing that planning for the future, one of my number one goals there is, can we get the house paid off by the time they reach retirement or shortly thereafter? Working with my clients, those who have their house paid off, it just changes them emotionally and mentally when they start planning for the future. Buying a house, it is something we recommend. We think it's important for wealth building, but having hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt that is attached to you and that you're responsible for takes a mental toll. And once that gets paid off, we just see people really kind of relax a little bit. They don't have that concern that, oh, I've got to make that mortgage payment. Oh, I owe the bank something. That's really powerful. And that's really where we try to get people to in retirement or at retirement. But what's really cool is seeing people who get that home paid off early. I have a number of clients that through hard work and dedication are getting that home paid off, before 50 or around 55. Maybe they took out that 15-year mortgage and just plunked away at it. Maybe they were just really diligent about paying extra on principal each month. Or maybe they inherited some money and were able to pay that off, or were able to take a fair amount of money out of a business or the sale of stock to pay that off. So we just find that very, very powerful for the ability to continue building wealth for a client. Now, I know there's arguments out there, and they are valid, that say, well, you shouldn't pay any extra on your mortgage if you have a low interest rate. You should invest those dollars for something else. And while that is a little bit of a balancing act there, I just think that the ability to say I am debt-free and I don't owe anybody anything is very, very powerful to someone's sense of well-being.
Yeah.
So we want to kind of come up with a plan for clients of how to balance those two arguments. I was sitting down with a client just recently, very, very kind of blue-collar family. And we were kind of going over that. They're at a point with their situation is both of the husband and wife are working. They're doing fairly well for themselves. And there was a question of, should we be putting more money at retirement, or should we work on getting the house paid off? And looking at the numbers, I could see that they were about 30 months. They just focused on paying off the house to having no debt at all. And in my mind, taking the next 30 months, just knocking out that debt really opened things up for them.
Yeah.
And that was before they even got to the age of 50. So in building our plan for them, we really recommended, hey, just focus on this. Don't worry about putting anything else into your retirement accounts. Just focus on this one thing. They're putting a little bit already, so they're not putting every dollar towards the mortgage. But by doing that, by the time 2023 rolls around, they'll be completely debt-free and still have another 15 to 20 years of work in front of them where they can build up those accounts and really just kind of remove that worry. It opens up a lot of different options for them to do that. So that's really, I think, one of the funnest things we can do is help people see the opportunities they have in front of them, that if they focus and work really hard for a short period of time, what can happen, and then show them what happens afterwards and what their options can be if they really do that.
Hey, Royal, do you have access, or do you utilize a calculator of some kind that can show people how it would affect their mortgage if they paid a little extra? Because from my understanding, if you're, at the very first part of your loan, you're paying a ton in interest. We've talked about that. Mm-hmm. You're paying, a ton in interest, very little toward the principal. I would assume it would be most beneficial to be able to pay a little extra every month at the very beginning of your mortgage loan, and to be able to see how that calculates out over the 30 years or the 20 years, depending on what mortgage you get. Obviously, that's also the hardest time in your life to pay extra toward a mortgage because you're young and just purchasing a home. But do you have some tools and resources that you can use to help people see what that would do for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just part of our planning that we go through to look at for our clients.
Nice.
When we sit down with a client, we can go over those numbers. The other thing I would encourage people to look at is there's so many options there on the term of the loan that you're getting that it might just make sense to look at the difference between a 30-year and a 20-year loan. It's not as dramatic as moving to a 15-year loan, but that reduction in the amount of years means you're just paying so much less interest over the life of that loan. So that's really, I think some of the best advice is looking at, instead of looking to pay a little extra, just take a smaller term on it and kind of lock that in. The other part of planning for home ownership in retirement and having a mortgage is how much money do you need to have in a retirement account or an after-tax account to pay for the mortgage? So when we look at that, in just using kind of back of the napkin math here, using the 4% rule, meaning you can take 4% off of a sum of money for the next 20 years, you would need to have about $300,000 set aside to pay for a $1,000 mortgage. So if we look at that and just say, well, if we focus and get that mortgage paid off, that's $300,000 we don't need. That's $300,000 that now is opened up and, can be used for other things versus just paying that mortgage. So especially, for a couple coming in maybe 10 years from retirement, we really want to do that balancing act of focusing on how much can you save and then how much can we get the mortgage paid down.
Yeah. Wow. Huge difference.
And finally, I don't know if you need many more arguments for home ownership in retirement, but what we see quite often is someone who didn't really plan for long-term care, which we spoke about last episode. Oftentimes, what they're doing in the back of their mind is saying, oh, I have the home. If I ever need long-term care, we can sell that, which we see happen kind of quite often as the backup plan for long-term care of, okay, we need to move into an assisted living facility. We need to move into nursing care. That's really where we can sell the home, replenish the liquid assets, and pay for that care for another 5 or 6 years, depending on the value of the home. So just another argument for home ownership as an essential part of your financial plan.
Yeah, absolutely. So many good points today, Royal. Anything else before we wrap up?
I would say the big point is, if you have questions about this, if you're looking to say, hey, how does this fit into my individual situation? Because everyone's situation is different. Let's have a conversation about it. And we can come up with kind of a best case scenario for you and yourself and your family of how to deal with it. So, this isn't a cookie cutter conversation that we have with people. It really comes down to the specific facts of their specific situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty of what you do. I mean, that's something that we've talked about on many podcasts, is that you sit down and you find out all the things that families try to accomplish, hopes, goals, dreams, and knowing the ins and outs of all their finances, that helps you to help them paint the picture or put the puzzle pieces in place. It really gives them that clear picture of what they can do and what they can accomplish over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Royal, again, such great information. And for those that are thinking about it and, homeowners or people even just starting that journey of possible home ownership, if they'd like to have this conversation with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, give me a call at 772-1116, area code 541, or you can go to our website and just schedule a call right there at opfa.com.
Always a pleasure, Royal. Thank you again for your time.
Take care, Eric.
You bet. And thank you for listening and tuning in to the Life by Design podcast with Royal Standley. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Royal comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Life by Design podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The views expressed are those of the presenter and may not reflect the views of United Planners Financial Services. Material discussed is meant to provide general information and is not meant to be construed as specific investment, tax, or legal advice. Individual needs vary and require consideration of your unique objectives and financial situation. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Advisory services offered through Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, Inc. Securities offered through United Planners Financial Services of America, member FINRA and SIPC. Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, Inc. and United Planners Financial Services are independent companies.